back with you on the second edition of the India Development Debate. We put the spotlight on our special series, the 4-year report card, and we're going to talk about the financialization and formalization of the economy. It was considered to be the panacea for all the ills of the economy, be it demonetization or the GST. The big idea behind these strategic reforms, that the BJP calls it, was to transform India into a more formal economy. But as the Modi government completes 4 years in office, the jury is still out on whether these disruptive reforms have actually delivered the desired results. Cash is still king, as has been seen during the just concluded Karnataka Assembly elections. Not just that, a recent study by global brokerage Nomura pegs currency in circulation at 11.3% of the GDP in April, tantalizingly close to the pre-demo days.
All's not well in the digital payments front as well. A report by the RBI says use of plastic money has come down steadily after the peak in March last year as people shifted to cash deals for their daily chores. To the Modi government's credit though, thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises have joined the formal economy thanks to the big switch to GST. On our special series on the government's 4-year report card, we analyze the hits and misses of the central government's drive to formalize the economy. Joining us on the show this evening, Sajid Chinoy, economist at JP Morgan, Vaibhav Agarwal of the BJP, and Sanjay Jha, national spokesperson of the Congress party. Sajid, I'm going to start off with you. What's your view? I know you believe that this government has done a good job as far as the macroeconomic parameters are concerned in terms of the overall structure, but formalization of the economy, would you call that a big hit of this government? I mean, that's something that the government tried to achieve both with demonetization and GST, but do you believe that they have taken significant steps to formalize the economy, and will that go down as one of this government's biggest economic achievements? Sajid.
Hi, good evening. I think firstly we have to kind of just set the stage here that formalization of the economy manifests itself in various dimensions, one of which is cash to GDP, and we should talk about that. The other is what's happening to tax collections, especially direct tax collections and tax SSEs. The third would be, for example, the composition of savings, household savings. Are we moving from physical assets more to financial assets? So there are various manifestations of this. The second part I think to recognize and appreciate is this around the world experience has shown this process takes a long time. This cannot be accomplished in 2, 3 or 4, 5 years. This very often takes decades, to example. So this is very often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Now, given that backdrop, and and the other lesson I think is typically carrots tend to work better than sticks. Given that, I think we've made a good start on the formalization process, but this is going to take time. So this is very much a work in progress. Yes, cash to GDP has picked up, but I think we need to be careful here about how we measure these things. One needs to look at the counterfactual. Where would cash to GDP have been absent demonetization? At the rate things were growing before demonetization, that number would have been close to about 13% right now. So the fact that we are close to 11% still suggests that we're less than where we would have been. So there has been some improvement there. It is a slight cause of concern that cash to GDP has been picking up quite sharply, and that surprised many analysts the last few quarters. One interpretation of that is that we're seeing signs that the rural economy is picking up, and that's largely still a cash dominated economy. So that may explain why you've seen the surge in the last 5 or 6 months, which again suggests that while we've made a good start, more work needs to be done to gradually migrate people from cash to bank accounts, and I think the Jan Dhan focus has to continue. So I think there are some challenges still there, but we've also made some progress. If you just look at direct tax collections last year and look at tax buoyancy last year, or look at the number of new tax attendees, the growth rate of that in the last year, there's been substantial progress on that front. So my sense is this is a good start. All of us agree we need to formalize the economy. We need to have larger firms which can use economies of scale to compete with Chinese exports, for example. We've made a good start, but this is very much a work in progress, and more will need to be done in the coming years.
Sajid, I take your point about a good start, and I will quickly make my point about you joining us a little more often on the India development debate. You should not just be a morning animal, be a nocturnal animal as well, sometimes on ET Now. But if I may take this across to Sanjay Jha, and Sanjay, you know, Sajid makes an important point about this being a good start. I mean, look at figures. Only 1/4 of the 240 million Indian working outside farms actually file income tax returns. But post demonetization, the direct tax compliance, largely from the personal tax, is up. In fact, direct taxes in fiscal year 18 at 6% of the GDP are at a decade high. There has been a significant improvement in the number of tax filers too. 8.6 million in 2017, 9.9 million new income tax return filers in 2018. Isn't that a positive sign of a structural change in the Indian economy? You need a higher tax to GDP ratio, and that's going to only come if you have events like a demonetization or a GST. At least numbers seem to prove that.
Supriya, in terms of a principle of economics, I don't think anybody will dispute that the formalization of an economy is a good thing. Yes, it is. I agree with that. I agree with Sajid Shinoy with what he says. But there is a sharp difference in terms of the way we look at it. Number one, in our opinion, the formalization of an economy is an evolutionary process. It happens with economic growth. It happens when larger companies begin to gradually take the space of the informal sector. It doesn't happen through a shock to the system. You know, the disruptive demonetization, I mean, that is definitely not the panacea for making your economy formal. You can't, in short, force it. And let me tell you why you have negative consequences when you do that. If you look at demonetization today, what did it do? It disrupted India's GDP growth. You lost industry output, especially from the informal sector. And all of us, you know, we sit in, you know, we are urban people, all of us are urban animals on the program. The real damage to India's rural informal sector is absolutely humongous. And when you capture that data into your national performance, you realize it actually slowed India's GDP. We are still recovering from the negative repercussions of demonetization. Job losses, tremendous. And you know, the very critical thing here, you see, when you decide that, you know, demonetization or GST is necessarily going to lead to formalization, what happens? I'll give you the data on that. Today, cash is back with the bank. Today, I can give you the data on that. The number of ATM transactions today are lower than the ATM transactions pre-demonetization in October 2016. I take that. And my last point, look at black money.
Sure.
Since the talk was that it was going to be black money, just last point, 15 seconds.
Sure.
How is it that in Karnataka, the BJP was offering 100 crores to buy out MLAs? What was that money coming from? Was that going to be a check payment or a cash payment? Okay. So, you know, the truth is formalization of an economy is definitely a salutary thing, but by forcing it, you actually created a major negative fault line, and the economy is still struggling to get back to even keel.
Okay, I take that point. Coax or coerce, that's what we're going to ask Sajid Shinoy. But before I go back to Sajid, Vaibhav Agarwal, comment on the point made there by Sanjay Jha. Was the cost worth it? Especially with demonetization that led to several quarters of subpar growth. I mean, we seem to be perennially in recovery mode. From the time the government came to power, first we were in recovery mode because of whatever the UPA left the, you know, this government with, and then because of demonetization, and then because of GST, and now because of crude. You know, we seem to be perennially in recovery mode.
Yeah, you know, with all due respects to Sanjay ji, he is a senior, but I think I would want to request him to, when he comes to ET Now, he needs to read a little more and stick to the topic rather than giving a political angle. Now let me bring out some numbers for Mr. Jha, which is the political side, and of course for you and Supriya to analyze as the government what I'm trying to say here. So, you know, I was doing some jiggery as to in a 20-minute show how best I can put the thought forward. Now let me put this forth. Now when we look at formalization of the economy, you know, it's an evolutionary process, yes, but what government takes what evolution time for it to formalize it is absolutely what we are trying to do here, and we're pushing it. Now how are we pushing it? Let's quickly divide it into some parts for the sake of the audience's ease. I don't want to complicate it into an economic thing like the whole day ET Now keeps showing the ups and downs of the stock market, which I also don't understand. But So let's look at digital payments growth. And I will now connect it to reach of services, and this is a supply chain I'm talking about and a formalization of economy. Reach of services to the last mile, then there is banking, which is decrease in cash. Now this is the only area where cash is the king right now, but what we tried to do with the digital payments in the first place was to reduce the cash, but it's still cash is the king, but that will come back to it, because digital payments is 150% up in terms of its usage. Then reach to social services, we all know the data is right in front of us. CRISIL has also come up with some data that the rural economy is suddenly doing well because of the Jan Dhan Yojana. So banking services are reaching out to the people. If you pick up a last 2 years worth of stock trading both in NSE as well as on BSE, there are over 200 scripts which have given you a return anywhere between 100 to 900% consistently. So I have some of the scripts in front of me, but so that's formalization of economy. You're giving stability to the economy even after a shock and awe of demonetization. So it makes a difference. Inflation in 2013-14 was 12% at an all-time high, 12+%. It's a 4+ something percent right now. And then the best part, what we look at for a long-term formalization in the economy is the transparency in the system. Over 2 lakh shell companies have been erased from the system of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and close to 80,000 crores plus money has come into the banks as repayment or restructuring of loans by the defaulters. Now that's formalization.
I agree with some points that you make, but I vehemently disagree with a lot of the others. Cash is back as king, and how are we going to deny that? So anyways, let's leave that. Let's just leave that aside for a moment. I'll go back to Sajid. And Sajid, coax, don't coerce. Is that the best way to go about formalizing the economy, where more than 50% of the economic activity actually happens? I mean, does the solution rest in policies that aim to encourage formalization but not discourage informal economic activity? At least that's what demonetization and GST did. Yes, they encouraged formalization, but they discouraged informal activity far more.
Well, Supriya, I think let's step back. I think we need to separate demonetization from GST. I think the goal and the objective of GST is much larger and much broader. Yes, to the extent that it formalizes the economy, that's an added benefit. But really, the main objective of GST is to have a common market. Thus far, India had 30 different states, and there were segmented markets. And now we have a common market for the vast majority of goods and services. And I cannot emphasize enough how in the medium term what that does to efficiency, to allocative efficiency, to total factor productivity, right? We will see transportation costs will go down, transportation times will go down, and when the next set of investment happens, you'll have far more consolidation, because now you will be operating in a common market. This is a bit like the Euro project. So I think that's the main purpose of the GST. Will there be near-term transitional costs? There always are. I think there's a lot of obsession what the near-term GST revenues are, and that's understandable. But I think we need to look at what the benefits will be over the next 3 to 5 years, and both governments need to be commended for mooting this idea some time ago, and for the GST Council that's pushed this through. So I think that's the larger role of the GST. I think the other benefit here is going to be that when you get people in the net for indirect taxes, we now have the information network is comprehensive enough to then ensure that they're also paying direct taxes. I think that's the larger issue here, that India has to increase its direct tax to GDP base, because direct taxes are progressive, indirect taxes are regressive, and you want to move away from regressive taxes in an economy whose per capita income is like ours. The whole debate about fuel prices, for example, it reflects that indirect taxes have had to be quite high because we lack the depth and the breadth of direct taxes. So hopefully once the GST stabilizes, that can be a vehicle to boost direct taxes, so that over time, these excise duties, for example, can come down, and we rely progressively less on these regressive taxes.
You know, Sanjay, like Sajid says, you know, if you were to step back and, you know, we've been very critical of demonetization. You've been a part of many of those debates where we've been critical of demonetization. But if you were to step back now and look at the big picture, the combination of demonetization, GST and what it has done to, you know, to create, you know, to migrate value from the informal to the formal sector. And then, of course, the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile, or the holy trinity of, you know, Jan Dhan Aadhaar and mobile, which, you know, a brokerage like Morgan Stanley believes will help catapult India into a $6 trillion economy in less than a decade. I mean, there is going to be a visible upside, which probably is not visible now to us, but it is going to come through, and you can't sort of dismiss that as another jumla.
Well, let me give you a couple of facts there, Sandeep. Good point. I said at the beginning, I'll repeat it again. Formalization of an economy over a period of time is the, I think, objective of any government. Not just because you want to improve your tax GDP ratio, because end of the day, it is also a manifestation of a more efficient economy. But let me point out this to you. In India, you know, every country has got its unique challenges. India's informal sector contributes 40% to the economy, 75% to the workforce. Now, you know, look at the collections of the direct taxes and indirect taxes, by the way. Have they really gone up very significantly post demonetization, whether it's GST indirect or demonetization on direct taxes? They have not. Look at them as a percentage of GDP, they have not really moved up. And the fundamental point, you know, informal sector, by the way, let's not try and baptize it as some kind of an evil in India's economy. It is a social reality. Informal sector is also a safety net for many people who don't have education, who don't have the skills, who don't have the opportunities that a lot of people have who are educated and have got better opportunities to work in the organized corporate sector. So to say that you can dismantle it all by bringing everything under the formalized sector is actually trying to, you know, kind of forcibly bridge a gap between the Bharat and the India. These are realities of our times. We can't wish them away by, you know, using all kinds of sexy acronyms that Narendra Modi's government does all the time. JAM, etc., etc. And my last point here. Fundamental flaw with demonetization and GST. GST, I agree with Sajid completely. A great indirect tax reform, terribly executed because of the lack of bandwidth and adequate training to people. Hopefully it will get streamlined. But demonetization, I think it has to be India's worst disaster since 1947.
All right, you know, I'm going to take a cue from what you said about the informal sector. Let's not wish it away. Let's not paint this as something that's evil. Vaibhav Agarwal, I'll come to you. While we dismiss the informal sector for not paying taxes, the fact is it accounts for 40% of Indian economy, in fact more, 45 to 50%, and provides employment to 75% of its labor force. Any attempt to squeeze the sector is fraught with very, very wary consequences, because this is where the bulk of our low-skilled workers find employment. And that is exactly what had happened in demonetization. This sector got impacted, the jobs got squeezed, and these are the kind of people who got impacted.
I totally agree to you. I'm not running away from the responsibility of, yes, accepting it. It's right up in the numbers that the sector's gotten impacted. But at the end of the day, as I'm saying, there is an overall macro level effect that the economy has to undergo before it gets formalized. And now that it's getting formalized, a lot of wages, for example, earlier it was in cash, a lot of wages, an example, small and medium enterprises, the so-called sort of an informal sector, have moved to bank payments or payments through Paytm and so on and so forth. Today, even my rickshawala and my chaiwala outside our studio, for example, gives me chai on a Paytm payment, you know, and just so to say, bring direct taxes in place again, just to highlight a little in terms of women. Let me take this forth. In 2013, a lady who was working, had an income of 5 lakhs, was paying tax for about 28,800 rupees plus. In 2013-14, this is UPA 2. In 2017-18, how much is she paying? She's paying about 12,800. That's half of it. So what is my middle class doing? That's where my middle class is. So income by 25 lakhs, 6 lakhs worth of tax was paid in 2013-14 on a 25 lakh income. How much are you paying? You're paying 20,000 less than that. Now you go to the 75 lakh slab, it was 21 lakhs 42,000. No, Sanjay Jha, it is not political, it is not.
I'm not sure how
you should be more prepared. This is not a political debate.
Okay, Weber, I take that point. I'm not sure what is the point you're making.
So you see, So the point I'm making is that that we are too quick
Please
in
respect the
analyzing whether
viewers.
the formalization has happened.
Okay, you're saying we are
need
too quick in
we
analyzing
just
whether
need to
formalization has
understand
happened. Let me ask
that
Sajid
the
Chanoy.
formalization is happening.
Okay,
it's
okay.
a process. It
Okay.
started and it's on track.
Okay, you're
That's
saying it's a
what we need to
process,
focus
it started,
on.
it's
and
on
perhaps
track.
next
Sajid?
year when you come back in March, while the budget is there, we'll have better numbers to talk
Okay,
about.
sure. Sajid, how, what does a shift to formal economic activity really entail? I mean, how do we ascertain what deeper effects will be visible? When will the upside be more visible? We're seeing it in the payroll data, which of course the government is claiming that indicates job creation. One would argue whether it's job creation or not, you don't know, but it indicates that there's been formalization of jobs. Whether they are new jobs is debatable. But I'm trying to see how will this manifest itself? In what forms will it manifest itself? And by when will the upside be more visible, more tangibly?
Yeah, thanks. Some good questions there. I think first, when this will take years. I think the evidence, I do agree with both panelists. This is evolutionary. This is going to be, a gradual process. So this is not going to happen in a few quarters. This will take a few years. Where does it manifest itself? I think there are some very tangible markers we should look at. One will be cash to GDP. When cash to GDP either stabilizes or begins to go down, that will be a clear manifestation. The second will be on taxes, right? Where do tax to GDP go, both direct taxes and indirect taxes. The third is going to be on how many formal jobs we create. The fourth is going to be on what is the ratio of digital payments to cash transactions. The fifth is going to be the average size of firms in India. There's an interesting anecdote here from Dr. Panagria's book some years ago, which looks at the apparel sector and finds that about 80% of workers in that sector were working in firms of 10 people or less, and we're competing against China, where more than 50% of the workforce in that sector is working with firms of 200 and bigger. So there are very clear manifestations, and I think these are all metrics that we should monitor. Let me just make one last point here. Ultimately, what needs to be done is you have to reduce the costs of formalization. You have to make it incentivize smaller firms to grow larger without having to pay unduly large costs. What does that entail? For example, significant labor law reform. You don't want to impose penalties where firms increase their workforce to 20 or 200 or 200. That cost of complying with those labor laws is so high that you disincentivize firms to remain low. You want to make tax compliance easier so that firms are not disincentivized from growing larger. So I think having achieved what we have, we now have to work doggedly on some of these things so that the cost of becoming formal is so low that it swarms. It's much lower than the benefits from becoming formal. I think those are the means to do it, and the markers I mentioned, there are various objective markers that we should look at on an annual basis.
All right, that's a fruitful discussion, and thank you very much for joining us, all of you here. Sajid Chinoy, like I said, we hope to see more of you on the India Development Debate in the evenings. Sanjay Jha and Vaibhav Agarwal, thanks as always for enriching our discussions, getting the political perspective to the economic discussions here. That said, a formal economy is clean, it is transparent, but informal is not evil. Just like cashless is good, desired, but cash is the lubricant for an economy like India, which has 50% of its economic activity in the unorganized sector. That also said, India needs more and more people, at least the ones who must and can, to pay taxes.
That's right. For India to meet its development goals and development targets, the only way for it to happen is if we broaden our tax base, have more people filing taxes, and broaden the kitty that can be deployed on development funds. Time around this edition of the India Development Debate. Up next is Top 10 at 10. Keep it with ET now. Good night.